Welcome back to Lost Codex Legends. My name is Jesse, and today we're talking about Thrall once again for his entire storyline throughout the Cataclysm. Now, you might say, Jesse, we've covered several expansions and several games over the last two. We're only doing one? Well, he did a lot in the Cataclysm, specifically in some books. So today we're going to dive right into Thrall's storyline as the world shaman in the Cataclysm. And with that, let's just dive right in. Let's just talk about Thrall right away. Here we go. Now, Thrall has stepped down as war chief. He now wears some very simple shaman robes and some really big beads and a hood. No longer wears the doom plate. Carries the doom hammer, but no longer wears the doom plate. And as the storyline plays out, it's revealed that Thrall is actually captured by SI-7 agents on his way to the Maelstrom. The dude's trying to go save the world, and the SI-7 just get in his way. And the goblins, specifically the Bilgewater Cartel goblins, have recently just fled from Kazan. The fleets are controlled by Gallywix. The player is a prisoner on board Gallywix's fleet, and they play an active role in rescuing Thrall. Now, in gratitude, Thrall helps the player goblins and the survivors in their battles across the Lost Isles. And towards the end of the storyline, Thrall physically fights Trade Prince Gallywix, beats him, and then proclaims that the cartel will join the Horde. Other goblin cartels have always been neutral, but specifically the Bilgewater, specifically because the Alliance fleet opened fire on the Bilgewater, there's now some faction animosity there. Thrall declares that they will join the Horde, and for some reason lets Gallywix stay in charge. He lets Gallywix stay in charge of the Bilgewater, and it's a great decision move. It's really, Thrall, God, what is with your ability to choose leaders? Either way, the goblins join the Horde, and they're sent to speak with Garrosh Hellscream. As tensions within the Horde begin to rise, notably between Vol'jin and Garrosh, Thrall steps back into the picture very briefly during the Troll Starting Zone questline, where he appears as an image. He's talking to Vol'jin. Thrall reaffirms his decision to promote Garrosh to War Chief and says that the Horde needs a hero's name. They need a hero of the world, one that won't buckle or kneel before the Alliance, but one that'll bring pride to the Horde. And he reaffirms his decision to Vol'jin right then and there. And Vol'jin says, "All right, I won't bother you anymore. You have a world to go save. Go do your thing." Now, at this point in time, Thrall, as one of the most powerful shamans on Azeroth, Thrall has now stepped away from his duties as War Chief to join the Earthen Ring. And once he's at the Maelstrom, once he gets past the SI-7 and his little detour, this is where Deathwing made his return to Azeroth. The Corrupted Aspect's entry has shattered the barriers between Azeroth and the Elemental Planes, and Thrall lends his powers to stabilize the rift. There is some nasty energy coming out of the Maelstrom itself, and Thrall can be found there at the Maelstrom doing his shaman thing. Now, aside from his brief appearances at the Maelstrom and in the Goblin questline and in this Troll Starting Zone, Thrall's not really seen much in the early moments of Cataclysm, but that doesn't mean he's not doing anything. This next bit in his storyline is one hell of a roller coaster, and you may be unaware of this part if you haven't read Thrall Twilight of the Aspects, a book written by Christie Golden. This storyline features basically Thrall after he's arrived at the Maelstrom, but before the Rage of the Firelands stuff, before the Dragon Soul stuff at the end. So basically what happens is Thrall is struggling as a shaman, and Augur says that his connection to the elements has been fickle because he longs for the Horde. His mind, his soul is somewhere else. It's not easy just to step away from the Horde, especially since the Horde that he stepped away with is the Horde that he built. It's not just a random Horde, that is his Horde, and he's not entirely comfortable fully stepping away. Which of course Thrall denies. He's stubborn and says he has to leave to clear his head. At this time, there's unrest growing amongst the dragons after the Twilight cultists have attacked Wormrest Temple. Alexstrasza's consort Crassus has seemingly betrayed the Wormrest Accord and destroyed the sanctum underneath the temple, along with all the eggs found there. Alexstrasza is distraught, everyone's up in arms, and Alexstrasza flat out just disbands the Accord altogether. Of course, all of this is witnessed by Ysera, who then seeks out Thrall and convinces him to undertake a journey to a Kaldori village in Feralas, for a minor problem involving an elemental, specifically a fire elemental. And Thrall's a little bit confused. He says, why me? There are literally thousands of shamans. Why do you have to talk to the guy who's supposed to be at the Maelstrom right now? But fine, I'll go do it, I guess. He's pretty hesitant to do it. He goes there and he manages to convince the elemental to screw off, go do something else. He's reminded of the fire elementals that attacked Orgrimmar during the rampant, pre-shattering, pre-cataclysm bit. But he convinces the fire elemental to go do whatever there is fire elementals do. Get mad at things, I guess. And he has a nice evening chatting and eating and feasting with the night elves there. A night elf in this village, who's actually a green dragon named Desharin, approaches him and says, we gotta go to the Caverns of Time. Ysera has a much more important task for you. Once they're at the Caverns of Time, they're ambushed by a cloaked stranger who attacks them and flat out just kills Desharin. Thrall recognizes this stranger somehow. He's a hooded, cloaked stranger, so we can't see his identity, but there's something about him. There's something that he feels is oddly familiar. And as the assassin is using time magic and time portals to get the jump on Thrall, bronze dragons show up to take over for the fight. And when Thrall starts to lose, they tell Thrall to flee, just abandon this fight, jump through a time portal, go. And so he does, and he arrives in this alternate universe that's roughly scheduled around the time of the Second War. Now, when he's here, he begins to think, okay, I am in a Second War alternate universe. There's some things I can do. Meeting with Doomhammer is the first thing that comes to mind. But he realizes, I can't do that. That's going to change the timeline. He's actually mistaken, because of his green skin, as an orc warlock by an orcish patrol party, and he's taken to a neighboring base camp. To Thrall's astonishment, he catches a glimpse of not only Doomhammer, but Mum and Dad. Draka and Durotan are there. And to an even bigger surprise, Draka is holding a baby version of him. Draka actually approaches him with a tiny little Thrall in her arms, and there's a very brief conversation, but Thrall is mostly just at a loss for words. This is the first time he's seeing Mum and Dad in the flesh, and you can imagine how emotional that is for Thrall, hearing these legends and stories about how great Draka and Durotan of the Frostwolves were, and their terrible, terrible end, and how they lost their lives, and how he was a sole survivor in that attack. And you can imagine everything going on in Thrall's head, and he can't say a single word. It's moments after this that he realizes that this is the moment where, when Draka and Durotan are leaving camp, they are going to go off with the guards of Orgrim Doomhammer, who are actually loyal to the Shadow Council. This is mere moments before they're going to die. For a second, Thrall believes he can save them. He can save Mum and Dad. He can prevent it all from happening. And then he realizes he can't. This, again, he thought about talking to Doomhammer earlier, and he said, no, I can't do that. This is definitely something that he can't do, because this will mess up the timeline entirely. And Thrall is forced to watch Mum and Dad absolutely get murdered, massacred here. This is the moment where he loses his parents, and he has to absolutely exercise full restraint. He ends up joining the fray, but when it comes time where there's only one single assassin left, Thrall basically has to hold all of the restraint within him to let that assassin go. That assassin has to escape for the sake of the timeline, and Thrall cannot change that. Thrall cannot exact revenge. Thrall cannot change anything. What he can do is, in these final moments, as he's absolutely heartbroken, he approaches the body of his dying father, of dying Durotan, and he swears to a dying Durotan that his child will live, that their people will be redeemed, and that the orcs of all kinds will have a new place to call home. And there's someone who would change that. As the cloaked assassin from the Caverns of Time, he shows up to ruin the scene. Thrall doesn't get a break here. And attacks Thrall flat out amongst the gory, bloodied mess of the assassination site. The assassin says to Thrall that it will be much easier to kill Thrall when Thrall is a baby, rather than Thrall fully grown. And this is roughly when Blackmore, the human who raised Thrall, is approaching the site, him and his hunting party. And so Thrall grabs the attacker, grabs this hooded, cloaked figure, and tackles him into a river where they fight, just as Blackmore approaches the site of the dead orcs and finds the screaming baby Thrall, just as the timeline is supposed to happen. In the river, Thrall and this attacker are just going at it and fighting, and there's a glimmer of bronze scales. And once again, Thrall is transported to another dimension, to another moment in time. Thrall is transported to another moment in time, to another moment in the timeline, and his attacker is nowhere to be seen. Thrall does, however, find himself face to face with a fully grown Taretha Foxton, who's not the cheery Taretha Foxton he remembers. She's a little bit embittered to what seems to be a harsh life. After a little while, Thrall is able to convince her that it is in fact him, Thrall, showing an identical necklace to her. And she reveals to Thrall that Thrall actually died in this timeline when he was a child. It seems that Blackmore sobered up after he realized he was robbed of his child gladiator prize, and did the unexpected. Rather than fall into a pit of despair and depression and let alcohol consume him, as he did in the real timeline, he actually conscripted mercenaries into his new army and trained them himself. He gathered huge support, and Blackmore led his army against Orgrim Doomhammer and actually slew the Orc warchief in combat. Rather than having the completely bewildered orcs killed, Blackmore engages them in a secret pact. They join his army, creates one massive army, and together they march on Lordaeron, completely usurp the entire house of Menethil. Taranis is killed, Uther is killed, Anduin Lothar is killed, Arthas is forced to flee to Stormwind, and Aedalus Blackmore crowns himself king in this alternate, weird, messed up universe. Now, Thrall realizes that the timeline is way more messed up than it should be, and the only person who can help fix this would be a dragon. Now, luckily, Thrall knows that at this point in history, there's one dragon who's fairly close by, and that's Crassus in Dalaran. Now, this alternate universe Crassus is an archmage in Dalaran, and basically Thrall lucks out. If Crassus wasn't there, or if alternate universe Crassus was killed, who knows how the storyline would have happened. Luckily, Crassus was there. Thrall and Taretha travel to Dalaran to meet with Crassus, or Corielstraz is his dragon name, and after they convince Corielstraz to help them, there's a really confusing moment. This is where things get really meta for the time travel part.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
They realize that this timeway, the entire timeline they're in, is completely false. And they also realize that in this moment, time is an illusion here. And by realizing that this timeline is fake, that this timeline is false, it suddenly allows Thrall, and presumably Corielstraz, to see time itself. And what's interesting is, even though Corielstraz is not a bronze dragon, he's still able to help Thrall realize that his perception of time is illusionary. Allowing Thrall to step out of the timeline physically, he's able to leave the timeline just simply by realizing that this timeline is fake, and this leads to Thrall finding Nosdormu. If you're confused, that's okay, because mortals are not supposed to fully understand the concepts of time. Basically, Thrall realizes that time is an illusion, that time is fake, and steps out of the timeline, where he finds Nosdormu, as I just mentioned, and here the great bronze dragon has kept himself hidden away. Nosdormu reveals to Thrall and other bronze dragons that the reason he stepped away and retreated from the world was in order to discover the cause of a dire event that happens in the future in all timelines and to avert it. This event would be Nosdormu finding and presiding over the infinite dragonflight, so Nosdormu creates this corrupted alternate bronze dragonflight. Nosdormu also admits that he's the one responsible for sending this assassin after Thrall, and Thrall comes to realize the mysterious identity of the assassin when he was talking to Taretha in this alternate weird universe where King Blackmore presided after killing Orgrim Doomhammer and killing Taranis Menethil. King Blackmore was missing. No one had seen King Blackmore for a long time, and that's because King Blackmore had left the timeline to assassinate another timeline Thrall, the main timeline Thrall. This assassin who attacked him at the Caverns of Time and at the river near his dying father was King Attalus Blackmore from another timeline. From the timeline that he found Taretha in, from the same timeline that he talked to Crassus in, a timeline where Thrall dies as a child, and Attalus Blackmore rises to become the most dangerous Attalus Blackmore possible. Despite all this, Nosdormu actually thanks Thrall for giving him clarity and sends him on another task to find and hopefully lift Alexstrasza from her grief over Crassus's demise and betrayal, and to convince the Blue Dragonflight to set aside his differences with the others and to join forces against the impending darkness. Thrall seeks out Alexstrasza in Desolace, and it doesn't go well. Basically, Alexstrasza rebukes and denies Thrall any opportunity to help her get over her grief, and banishes him from Desolace. Despite this, Thrall does not give up hope.